Okay, for most of this war, the story the world got told was simple. America and Israel on one side, Iran on the other. A bilateral fight, brutal and one-sided, between a superpower and a regional power that picked a battle it couldn't win alone. That was the framing on almost every front page for weeks, in every press briefing, in every cable news panel arguing about troop numbers and bunker buster bombs, and how many more days Tehran could realistically hold out. It's a clean story, it fits in a headline, and it is almost completely beside the point. While American and Israeli planners were focused entirely on Iranian missile sites and nuclear facilities, satellite trackers and naval analysts started noticing something that didn't fit that framing at all. Chinese and Russian warships operating alongside Iranian vessels conducting what's officially called a maritime security belt exercise in and near the Strait of Hormuz, while the war Iran was supposedly fighting alone was still actively underway. Not a rescue mission, not a declaration of war on America, just routine-looking joint naval drills. The kind of thing that barely makes a headline on its own, except this wasn't the only threat. Around the same time, a defense research group called JINSA published a detailed account of dual-use missile components, air defense systems, and intelligence-sharing arrangements that have been flowing into Iran for years from 3 specific countries, none of which had fired a single shot in this war. And separately, CNN reported that China was actively preparing to deliver new air defense systems to Iran in the weeks following over a month of American and Israeli strikes. 3 separate stories, 3 different outlets, all pointing at the same 3 countries. And I want to argue to you today that this is the actual war that mattered most. The one nobody declared, the one with no casualties reported on either side, the one that made everything else in this conflict possible in the first place. Okay, let's get into it. The mainstream framing on this has been remarkably consistent and remarkably narrow. Most coverage treated China and Russia's posture as a story about restraint. Dosh, will Beijing intervene? Will Moscow get involved? With most analysts concluding, accurately as far as direct combat goes, that neither superpower showed any appetite for putting its own military assets directly into this fight. The Atlantic Council described China as reportedly hesitant to send arms to Iran at all, while noting Russia was busy benefiting from the global oil shock the war itself created. Carnegie's own researchers asked the question directly in their headline, "Why aren't China and Russia rushing to help Iran?" And GIS reports framed China's posture as careful hedging, neither full abandonment nor full alliance. Okay, every single one of those is asking the same underlying question, will the superpowers intervene? And the answer to that question, again and again, has been some version of no, not directly, not with troops, not with their own pilots in the sky. That is the wrong question, and I think it's been the wrong question this entire war, because the real story was never about whether China, Russia, or North Korea were going to enter this war. It's about how completely unnecessary entering the war ever was for them. Yeah, because of what they had already built years before the first missile in this conflict was ever launched. And today, I'm going to show you 3 things. First, what each of these 3 countries actually contributed to keeping Iran in this fight, none of it requiring a single uniformed soldier on Iranian soil. Second, the actual treaty architecture that quietly turned 3 separate bilateral relationships into something that functions like an alliance without ever being declared as one. And third, why this design, the version where nobody officially shows up, is a far more difficult problem for American planners than a real military intervention would have been. Does that make sense? All right, let's go one at a time. First, the framework. I call this the deniability engine. Here's the simplest way to picture it. Imagine a bank robbery with 3 people involved. One of them builds the getaway car months in advance and keeps it running outside. One of them supplies the tools that get the vault open. One of them sits 2 blocks away watching the police scanner and texting warnings. None of those 3 people ever walk into the bank. None of them touch the money. If you ask a prosecutor afterward whether any single one of those 3 people robbed the bank, the honest answer is no, not directly, not by themselves. But the robbery does not happen without all 3 of them doing exactly what they did. That is the deniability engine. It's not one country secretly fighting a war for another. It's three countries each doing one piece of a job that, combined, keeps a fourth country able to keep fighting with every single piece small enough, indirect enough, and deniable enough that no one of them ever has to answer for the whole thing. Move 1. Russia. The strategic relationship between Moscow and Tehran did not begin with the current war. It was built gradually over years, shaped by a pattern of reciprocal dependence that often runs counter to how these relationships are commonly understood. Since 2022, Iran has not merely been a recipient of Russian support. It has also been a crucial supplier of military technology to Moscow, particularly in the field of unmanned aerial systems. Iran transferred hundreds of Shahed series drones to Russia in disassembled form, along with thousands of additional components and training assistance that enabled Russia to establish domestic production capacity for similar systems. This exchange marked a turning point. Rather than a one-way relationship, it became a mutually reinforcing system in which Iran provided Russia with urgently needed battlefield technology, while Russia, in turn, gained the capacity to sustain and scale those systems independently. What emerged was not simply cooperation, but an operational feedback loop that strengthened both sides simultaneously. From this foundation, it becomes possible to understand a broader pattern involving not just two countries, but a wider network of interconnected support structures that collectively influence the balance of power without requiring formal alliance declarations or visible coordination on the surface. At the center of this system is what can be described as a deniability engine, a structure in which multiple states contribute to a shared strategic outcome without ever forming an explicit coalition. Instead of a unified alliance, what exists is a series of overlapping bilateral relationships, each one limited in scope, individually defensible, and politically deniable. Yet when combined, these relationships produce effects that resemble coordinated action. One of the most important features of this system is that every contribution is deliberately small enough to remain contestable on its own. A shipment of components, a technology transfer, a training program, or a dual-use export can each be explained away as isolated policy rather than part of a larger strategic design. But collectively, these incremental inputs determine whether a state like Iran can maintain military functionality under sustained pressure or face rapid degradation of its capabilities. China's role within this framework illustrates the ambiguity at the heart of the system. On one level, Beijing has been described by some analysts as cautious, hesitant, and primarily focused on preserving its economic relationship with the United States. From this perspective, China avoids direct military entanglement and limits itself to dual-use technologies and indirect forms of support. At the same time, reports have suggested Chinese involvement in preparing or considering the delivery of air defense systems and other sensitive technologies, particularly in response to escalating regional pressures. This dual interpretation is not contradictory, but rather illustrative of the system itself. China does not need to fully commit or fully withdraw. Instead, it operates in a space of calibrated ambiguity, providing just enough support to matter strategically while remaining below the threshold of overt escalation. This is the essence of the deniability engine: participation without declaration, influence without formal responsibility. North Korea occupies a different but equally important position within this structure. Its contribution to Iran is not primarily direct, but indirect through its deepening military cooperation with Russia. Over recent years, North Korea has supplied Russia with large quantities of artillery ammunition, conventional munitions, and personnel support for military operations, including deployments linked to active combat zones. This assistance has a cascading effect. Every resource North Korea provides to Russia frees up Russian industrial capacity, logistical bandwidth, and strategic attention. In turn, this allows Moscow to sustain its parallel partnerships, including its ongoing support for Iran. North Korea, therefore, does not need to engage with Iran directly to affect its battlefield position. It strengthens the node that connects to Iran, thereby influencing the outcome indirectly but meaningfully. This layered structure, supporting the supporter of a partner, represents one of the defining characteristics of modern strategic networks. It diffuses responsibility while preserving impact. A further visible expression of this system is found in the recurring joint naval exercises conducted by China, Russia, and Iran. These maritime security belt drills, often held near strategically sensitive maritime corridors such as the Strait of Hormuz, predate the current conflict but have taken on heightened significance during periods of active tension. While officially framed as routine military cooperation, their timing and continuity carry broader implications. The simultaneous presence of multiple major powers' naval assets in contested or strategically important waters creates opportunities for intelligence sharing, operational coordination, and enhanced situational awareness, even in the absence of formal alliance structures or declared intent. The key strategic value lies not in overt action, but in proximity. Shared presence itself becomes a mechanism of coordination, allowing states to benefit from each other's capabilities while maintaining plausible deniability about the nature of their cooperation. Underneath these operational layers lies a deeper structural reality, a lattice of bilateral treaties and strategic partnerships that collectively simulate the behavior of an alliance without ever forming one. Russia's 2022 no-limits partnership with China marked a significant expansion of economic and technological cooperation, reinforced by rapidly growing trade and energy interdependence. Russia's 2024 strategic agreement with North Korea formalized a mutual defense relationship while also signaling political alignment in ongoing global conflicts. Russia's 2025 partnership with Iran further institutionalized a relationship that had already been evolving through years of military and technological exchange. What is striking is not the strength of any single agreement, but the absence of a unified framework connecting all participants. There is no overarching four-way treaty binding China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran into a formal bloc. Instead, there is a web of bilateral relationships, with Russia occupying the central position as the connective hub. This architecture is significant because it eliminates a single point of accountability. Each relationship stands independently, allowing every participant to deny collective intent. Yet together, they form a system that behaves as though coordination exists. Critics of this interpretation argue that what appears to be a coordinated structure may in fact be nothing more than parallel self-interest. From this perspective, China is primarily motivated by economic stability, North Korea by regime security, and Russia and Iran by their respective survival imperatives. In such a view, alignment is incidental rather than designed. This counter-argument is important because it highlights a central analytical challenge: the difficulty of distinguishing between coordination and convergence. Great powers routinely make independent decisions that produce similar outcomes without any formal cooperation. However, even if no explicit coordination exists, the operational outcome remains unchanged. Iran's military systems continue to function, its drone and missile programs remain active, and its defensive capabilities are sustained through a combination of external inputs that originate from multiple independent actors. This is why the concept of a deniability engine remains analytically useful. It does not require conspiracy or centralized planning. It only requires a consistent pattern in which each actor contributes in limited, defensible ways that collectively produce a strategic effect. Historical precedent reinforces this logic. During the Korean War, Chinese forces openly entered the conflict, while Soviet pilots covertly flew combat missions in aircraft marked as North Korean or Chinese. Strict operational secrecy ensured that direct Soviet involvement could not be formally proven, even as American pilots often suspected their true adversaries. The objective was not concealment for its own sake, but controlled escalation management, providing meaningful support without triggering direct superpower confrontation. Modern systems have evolved beyond disguising personnel. Instead of hiding pilots, states now obscure supply chains. Instead of masking troop deployments, they structure assistance through dual-use technologies, commercial channels, and layered intermediaries that remain below the threshold of formal war. In this sense, the contemporary network of cooperation involving China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran represents a technological and structural evolution of older Cold War-era practices. The form has changed, but the logic remains consistent: enable strategic partners while preserving ambiguity about direct involvement. Ultimately, the central issue is not simply whether these states are coordinating their actions in a formal sense, but whether their combined behavior produces a stable, repeatable pattern of indirect cooperation that shapes conflict outcomes. Whether this is described as alliance behavior or convergent self-interest, the result is the same: a system in which support is distributed, responsibility is fragmented, and escalation is carefully contained.